Hello, and welcome to Local Writers Read for October. Our theme tonight is Fragments, and we are so glad for everyone who is tuning in tonight to join us. Thinking of fragments, and somehow the fact that October is here already, we can think about broken things, about broken memories, about broken pieces of a life, about things being taken apart or even being put back together. As with all of our readings, there are so many different ways to take a theme. We have 2 readings tonight and 3 more tomorrow afternoon, and we've got a very exciting set of readers who will be looking at this theme from different directions and sharing work. So um, make sure to come back in for that. And as always, you can look back on our YouTube or our website and see all our past events as well. And we want to give our usual shout out to Quiet City Books for continuing to host us, even though we are digital this season. Quiet City always supports us and supports just the arts in Central Maine and is fantastic. So be sure to check out their offerings. And the Lewiston Public Library, who co-sponsors and helps spread the word for all the stuff that we're doing here. So as always, I will be watching the comments tonight, and we will have time at the end for Q&A and discussion. So if you have anything you want to share with us or the readers, feel free to drop those questions in, and we will get to them as we are able. And without further ado, I will turn things over to Claire Guyton, my co-organizer for the series, to introduce the evening.
Thanks, Josh. And happy fall to everyone. I cannot believe that we're already in October, already so late in the Local Writers Read season. This is our penultimate event for 2020. So just one more after this one. And it really has been so beautiful here in Maine these last few days. So again, happy fall. Okay, so Josh is doing double duty tonight as our MC and a reader. Josh is a fiction writer and playwright. He's a graduate of the Stone Coast Creative Writing Program, and he works across genres with a focus on speculative fiction, including a forthcoming novella about a gunslinger and a snarky battle unicorn. Learn more about his work at joshgauthierwriter.com. That's joshgauthierwriter.com. Next, we'll hear from our friend Jess Ko. Jess is an author of short stories, poems, and several novels in progress. Her stories have been published or are forthcoming in Metaphorosis magazine, Fusion Fragment, Ghost Parachute, and others. She lives in Portland, Maine, and holds an MFA from the Stone Coast Writers Program as well. So here we go. Josh, I'm handing the program right back to you so you can entertain us with Sasha the Battle Unicorn.
Yes, so this is chapter 6 from my adventure fantasy novella, Land of Outcasts. And a side note, I just recently got the last rough for the illustrations that are going into this novella. So there's a little bit more work to be done on those, but it will be illustrated when it comes out, which is very exciting. The illustrations are beautiful, and I will be sharing some of those on social media a little bit later, so stay tuned for that. But a little bit of setup. Eli is a mercenary, and his partner is Sasha the Battle Unicorn. Things have gone wrong for them back home, so they are hiding out in a swamp down in the south of the continent, where they have been hired by a woman named Marion to basically be her protection as she goes out into the swamp looking for her father, who has been banished and disappeared there. So this chapter, they are going to meet up with Marion outside of town because they're trying to kind of be a little bit secretive about leaving. There's people that don't necessarily want them to do this. And so they're meeting up at something called the Giant's Tree outside of town, which is the landmark that they're looking for. And that should be pretty much everything you need to know. So we will jump in. This chapter is titled The Pleasures of Local Wildlife. The land bridge was a track of raised ground that wove between pools and bogs in a roughly northward direction. Despite the sharp, pale grasses and spongy ground, it proved a secure enough path, for the moment at least. In his regular position on Sasha's blind side, Eli listened close to every splash of water, every animal cry that rose around them. Harmon's folly soon vanished behind a curtain of moss and trees and hanging vines. Out here, away from the fine trappings of civilization, it was even more evident how strange a place Eli had led them into. Whatever happened, this would not be as simple as one of their jobs back home. And the jobs back home were never simple. A pair of snakes hung by their tails from a nearby tree, golden eyes unblinking. Birds flitted in the branches above them, and then the clouds of biting insects descended. Eli waved his arms. He flipped his collar up and pulled it tight. He cursed the ancestors of the small, biting vermin which gnawed his flesh. Sasha chuckled to herself, even though she wasn't watching him. What, like you're not bothered? Struck by a thought, Eli held his hand close to Sasha's side. The familiar pulse of her power radiated against his fingertips. Blasted unicorn magic. She was leaving Eli to suffer alone. Don't spend too much energy on these things, he said. You may need it for something worse than insects. You're just jealous you can't do the same. The flies were little more than specks that bit Eli's neck, climbed in his ears, delivered stinging bites everywhere beneath his clothes. Truly everywhere. Then there were the larger flies, great jeweled monstrosities that drew blood with every bite. Eli watched winged twigs hover just out of reach and stare with sick set of eyes. Dark spiders clung to his boots and hissed when he kicked them away. He felt his flesh becoming more corrupted with each step. Stop, stop, he set himself rummaging through the bags of supplies. Hungry already? There has to be something in here to keep these flies at bay, Eli said. These people can't live like this all the time. Every jar and package they had was labeled in either another language or some indecipherable local dialect. He put each back in its place, not daring to waste something important. He could face a few bugs until they got to Marion. Of course he could. You've been quiet, he said to Sasha as they resumed walking. Please tell me you understand how uncertain our situation is right now. Sasha bit at a particularly large red fly which darted away. Which part? Marion throws silver at us to find her father from 20 years ago. The overseer is already sniffing around. There has to be something we don't know. There always is, but what would you like us to do? Sit in town and drink with the old codgers until the Duke maybe forgets about us? Marion silver is good, and this is what we do. I know that, Sasha huffed. I know we need work, and in a cesspit like this, no job is going to look good. I just need to know that you aren't walking into this one blindly because a pretty face offered you money. When have I ever been led astray by a pretty face? Sasha lowered her ears and let the silence speak for her. Eli flushed slightly. Other than those times. Sasha snorted, and Eli reached out to pat her shoulder. I do understand how risky this is, he said. We'll be careful, and besides, if we're out in the green, it makes it more difficult for anyone to track us. This is a good opportunity. Continuing on, Eli realized that what he had taken for a small patch of land jutting from the water off to their right was actually a scaled creature at least as large as Sasha. Beady eyes blinked as they passed, but thank the powers, it didn't seem interested in them otherwise. I know we have no choice but to come here, Sasha muttered after a few moments, and I do trust you. Thank you, Sasha. He took a breath. It was good to hear those words from her at this time, to get the reassurance that even if you don't know what you're doing most of the time. The smirk was back on the unicorn's mouth. I would think that's the tree? Sasha cut off Eli's retort. Through a gap in the tree cover, Eli saw a towering trunk at least 3 times the height of any other around them. It was still some distance away, but appeared to be directly in the path of the land bridge they followed. The tree's bark was bone white and opened to a broad canopy of dark leaves, almost purple in color. Eli sized up the largest tree he had ever seen in his life. No, that one's not big enough. I figure we should probably keep looking. Sasha snorted and picked up her pace, forcing Eli to jog to keep up with her. You can make jokes when we're not threatened with being eaten alive. Marian was waiting for them at the foot of the pale tree. In a change from before, she wore trousers with tall boots made from some kind of dark, scaled hide, and a loose shirt with a vest laced over it. She carried a long jacket slung over one shoulder, and a battered cutlass hung at her waist. When they got closer, Eli also saw a variety of knives and a pair of hatchets on her person, and a hand crossbow strapped to the side of her leg. "She's got more weapons than you do," Sasha murmured as they approached. "Anyone can strap on weapons and look impressive." "You really think those are just for show?" He had to admit that no, even more so than before, Marian held herself as someone who knew how to handle the weapons she carried. It was in her stance, in the way she turned her head ever so slightly to monitor the environment. But Eli wasn't going to give Sasha the satisfaction of admitting what they both already knew. "Let's just see what the plan is." Marian stepped forward as they approached. "Did you have any trouble?" "The overseer's guard questioned us as we were leaving." Eli nudged Sasha. "In hindsight, we should have told him we were going fishing." Sasha looked unimpressed. "I don't know why I travel with you." She walked off to examine the giant's tree. Marian looked concerned. "What sort of questions?" "He wanted to know where we were going, seemed upset that he seemed to suspect that he wouldn't like the answer. Not that we gave him one." "Did he mention me at all?" "No, he didn't push us too hard about the matter either." Marian let out a breath. "Good. When they realize I'm not in town, the overseer will put things together quickly enough. But I don't expect Merrick to come after us. If we get everything loaded, we can be well away before they realize what we're doing." "Loaded?" In answer, Marian led Eli around the tree to a spot where the ground sloped down to the bank of a wide river, which wound its way from the northeast to the southwest. The gray water carried tufts of moss and the occasional branch on leisurely currents. Swarms of insects hovered over the water, the beating of their wings audible even at a distance. The rich, earthy, fetid aroma of the swamp was stronger here, and at the bottom of the slope, tethered to a low tree, was a raft. The large raft was made simply of lashed logs still covered in bark. A low wall ran around the edge, and Eli spied a pair of poles he assumed were used to guide progress down the river. There was no sign of protection from the elements or insects. A regular pleasure vessel, if Eli had ever seen one. Marian threw a stick at a pile of rope in the corner of raft. A pile of rope that uncurled itself and raised its head to look at them, bearing fangs. "This is all your fault," Sasha muttered in Eli's ear. Marian threw another stick at the alarmingly large snake as it slid into the water and swam away. Eli had to agree with Sasha, again, but she would be providing enough realism for both of them. "I think it looks lovely," he said. "How do we get down?" Marian smiled and stepped onto the muddy hill. Keeping her feet under her, she slid down the slope, hopping over the wall and landing on the raft with a small flourish. She turned to the others with the challenge written across her face. Eli straightened his jacket. "Well, that looked easy enough." Sasha snorted. "Go ahead then." "I will." He adjusted the straps of his pack and tested its weight. He studied the ground and the tracks that marked Marian's path to the raft. Easy enough indeed. Satisfied, he took a breath and stepped over the edge, and immediately felt his feet fly out from beneath him. With a curse, he couldn't stop the heavy pack from dragging him over backwards. Feeling his teeth snap shut from the impact, and with the warm wet of mud seeping into his pants, he slid down the hill and came to a stop against the riverboat. "Easy as hatching basilisks," Sasha cackled while Marian held out a hand to help Eli to his feet. On secure footing once more, he ran his hands over his coat and the back of his legs, slopping away the thick globs of mud clinging there. A bit of mud was nothing new, but Eli didn't care for the amused pity in Marian's expression, especially this early in their venture. And Sasha was unlikely to let him forget this moment. Yeah, he flipped the unicorn a rude gesture. "Let's see you do better." Sasha stopped laughing. She looked at the muddy slope that separated her from the raft, and her eye narrowed at Eli. Go on then, he told her, holding back laughter. She stepped forward, tentatively placing a hoof on the slick track, followed by another. When both front feet started to slip, she hauled her weight backwards. Come on, Eli called, enjoying himself now. He knew he'd pay for it the moment Sasha reached him, but for now, she was up there, and he was down here, and it was rather amusing watching a battle unicorn struggle to slide down a muddy hill. You can do it, Marion said, sincere encouragement to Eli's teasing. Sasha stepped forward again, tentatively lowering herself to the ground as she curled her legs under her. In this position, half lying down, half sprawled, she slid to where the others waited. Marion stepped back as Sasha stopped, but Eli only noticed her move behind him as Sasha hauled herself to her feet and shook the mud from her belly, spattering Eli with it in the process. Thank you for that, he said, spitting the bitter grit from his mouth. I was concerned there were a few clean spots left on my clothes. Don't laugh at me, was all the answer she gave. But you laughed first. Eli gave up. There was no arguing where Sasha's pride was concerned. The unicorn stepped into the raft and took a position near the front. Get the line, would you? Marion asked at one of the poles now in hand. Damp, soiled, and swallowing his own pride, Eli untied the raft and stepped on board as Marion pulled them out into the moving water. Thank you. And so I will now hand things off to Jess to share as well.
Thanks, Josh. That was awesome. I love that story. I'm stoked that you're getting that illustrated. I really can't wait to see that. All right. So the piece that I'm reading tonight is called After the Bonfire, and it's a flash fiction piece. So it's very, very short fiction. And it's based off of a poem that I wrote in a workshop at my MFA program of the same name. So here we go. After the Bonfire. We are both too drunk to have sex. He is limp, fleshy, swaying, fingers sliding in the sweat up my leg, under the hem of my shorts. I am loose, lips parted, saying things like, we shouldn't. I am too aware of the barren space around us and the warmth of his body on the humid summer night. He smells dully of sweat and detergent. The room is almost empty now. Just the couch we're sitting on and his wife's grand piano under the window have been left behind. White keys are scattered across the floor like ivory finger bones. The axe handle is sticking out from the piano's insides, where the blade severed the treble strings. I don't think I'll ever forget the sound of piano strings snapping in the dark. Everything else was taken outside and then apart by axe and hammer and hands. Do you want to come to a bonfire? He'd asked me. My wife is burning everything that reminds her of her mother. The three of us dragged the kitchen table, its matching chairs, rugs from the living room, a bookcase and its contents, their bed and all its linens out onto the lawn. We scratched their pine floors, scraped paint off the walls, and tore the back door off its hinges, but no one said a thing. His wife wanted to burn the piano too, because it was the first gift her mother ever gave her, but it was too heavy even for all three of us. Before lighting the fire, she went back inside with the axe and made awful music. After, she drowned everything in gasoline and tossed a match onto the pile. It burned quickly. We drank. Beer at first, and then a bottle of wine that someone brought after her mother's funeral, which was not good wine, but no one complained. And when the beer and wine ran out, we found a half-empty bottle of vodka in the freezer, something cheap and effective that burned its way down my throat, lit another fire in my stomach. We tossed the empty bottles on the fire and watched the sparks escape like fireflies across the uncut lawn, dying as they fell in the grass. I watched his hand slide down her back, up her shirt, their bodies the same shadow against the firelight. We danced drunk and barefoot in the dampness to the music of cracking wood, the echo of smashed piano keys, the hum of invisible cicadas somewhere beyond the yard. I talked her out of burning the house, he told me, after we went inside to check on their daughter. She was supposed to be asleep, but she was sitting up in bed because her room smelled like smoke. The girl clutched a rag doll to her face. I wasn't sure if he meant it as a joke. His wife is still outside, praying while her things burn down to ash and return to the sky. She's out there regarding constellations, God, as if such things exist for her. I imagine her drinking from that red tank, yellow spout down her throat, stepping into the flames, her pale skin sloughing off to pale bone, and I say again, we shouldn't, and mean it less this time. I can't remember how we got here or whose idea it was. My mind is full of holes that in the morning I won't be able to fill, a graveyard for lost time. I try to remember when we left the girl's bedroom, if we talked about this. He takes off his ring like it isn't the first time, slides it onto my finger where it dangles too big and falls to the floor. It rolls under the couch with lost dog toys and dusty pacifiers. Then his lips are on mine, tongue in my mouth. He's wet, soft, tasting of vodka and Pinot Noir. His wife calls through the open window from the embers of the dying fire. Is she asleep yet? He pulls away, and warm sweat slides down my chest, between my breasts. Is it mine or his? Sorry, he whispers and leaves the room. She comes inside and they go down the hall to the girl's bedroom together. I could fill this place back up with my things. My art on these empty walls, my rugs on these naked floors, my books on these barren shelves. I could fill him with me. I could lay down with that girl in her canopy bed on her princess sheets, tell her everything is going to be okay. She would call me mama. I get up and find where the back door used to be, where a gap in the wall frames the night sky and the black smoke swirling from the remains of everything. Maybe matter can't be destroyed, but it's still the end of something. I make my way around the side of the house where another fire has caught. Flames eat at the vinyl siding, turning it black. I don't know if I'm seeing things right or if I'll even remember this in the morning. I think about taking the long way home past the river where the air doesn't taste like ash. I think about how sometimes we burn what we love, and then I can't think anymore. Sirens wail somewhere in the dark, but it doesn't matter. What was here is already gone. Thank you.
Thank you. No, Jess, every time I hear you read stories, they're the sort that linger after they're done. And it's so cool. So yeah, that's our readings for tonight. We're gonna move into discussion now. We may have Allison, who is one of our readers tomorrow, coming shortly. But we'll move to discussion in the meantime. So if you're tuned in, feel free to drop comments or questions in the chat. I'll be keeping an eye on those. But Claire, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, well, first, let me thank you both for those readings. They were really fun, and I really enjoyed them. Again, it's just always so interesting how people tackle our themes and how it's just such a, we always tell people to think outside the box and think about, expansive ways that the themes can apply. And I think this is a great example of how we can stretch this notion of fragments. I was thinking, Josh, when you were reading your piece, I was thinking about sort of the fragments of these wanderers' lives kind of being left in various worlds and landscapes. And then just the fragments, all the fragments of a house. And it was really poignant when you talked about how, the protagonist is saying, oh, I could put my stuff on the shelf. I could put my stuff, against those walls. And yeah, I really like the way that just you address the theme in completely different ways. That's always really fun for me.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I wanted to say that your theme or your line of piano strings snapping in the dark.
Yeah.
Like that line is it's amazing.
Yeah, I actually Googled what they sound like when they snap because I wanted to know if they even made a heck of a sound, and it turns out that they do. So it's kind of cool. You should Google it. It's interesting.
Yeah.
Wow. I bet it's a little bit upsetting.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I picture it.
It's jarring. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So it really works as a metaphor for the story. Okay. So I will start with Jess and ask you my question about your piece.
Mm-hmm.
So I have specialized in very short fiction for some years now. So I think a lot about what makes micros and flashes successful. I teach a workshop in it. And I often talk about how for these pieces to work, we have to leave a certain number of gaps. We have to leave quite a lot of gaps. We have to leave a lot of the story out and make decisions about what we include. And we have to know that readers are going to be filling in those gaps in individual ways. So not every, in an interesting way, I think people walk away with different kinds of stories when they read a micro or a flash, because they're the co-creator of that story now.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that about micros and flashes. I'm perfectly happy. I'm actually strange in this way. I'm perfectly happy with any length story. If people interpret it differently from how I meant it, it doesn't bother me at all. But a lot of people don't like that. And so I was wondering how you feel about that. Like, is the piece for you, is it still successful if somebody winds up walking away from that piece with a very different story in their mind than what you intended? I know you want people to enjoy the piece, but is it okay if they have a completely different interpretation?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really great and interesting question. And I think about that a lot when I'm writing and when I'm reading. And I totally agree with you. Like, I don't think that I am attached to my own interpretation of what I'm writing necessarily. Like, I'm portraying it in the way that I interpret it in a way. But I agree that kind of the magic of short fiction in this way is all the things that you don't have to say, or kind of like don't get to say when it's 900 words. Um, and you're still trying to leave people with a full feeling, but like that fullness has to come from them too. Like you have to come to the story with things to kind of like add to it yourself. And I really like that about it. And I like with this piece in particular, like I purposefully left it kind of vague from that perspective of someone who's like, drunk and has like this kind of interesting experience of this night and this family falling apart. And I think that people have different experiences of those types of things in their lives too. And like you could ask either of the other characters or any of the other characters in that story to tell that story and it would be completely different. And so I think about that when people read things too. It's like you're bringing yourself to whatever you're reading. And I think that that's kind of like one of the benefits of it. So yeah, I don't mind at all when people walk away from things with different interpretations. Like I think that it's personal. Like reading is personal, and I think once I write something, I've heard other writers say this, but like once you write something, it's kind of no longer just yours. It belongs to the people who read it and consume it, and take other things away from it. So yeah, I think that's kind of actually a lovely notion.
Yeah, I really like that about it too. Uh, Josh, what do you think about that? For some reason, I saw your eyes moving. I thought Josh has a thought about this.
Yeah,
Am
no,
I?
I just didn't want to cut you off. It looked like you were gonna say something, but yeah, I mean, I think that whole idea of the connection of stories, because I mean, we talk about how like stories are kind of time travel, where like you put it down on the
Mm-hmm.
page at one point, and then somebody's picking it up a day later, a week later, a decade later, and coming back to this thing. And I mean, exactly like you were saying, that everybody's bringing kind of their own perspective to it. And I think one of the things in like the age of social media, when like authors and their readers are able to interact, I see these exchanges on Twitter where people like get to talk about they finish a book or a story, and then they're talking to the author, and they're like, just it meant so much to me, and they're talking about like the things that they got out of it, and like the way that that story met them where they were at that point in time. And yeah, that's going to look wildly different for this person or that person, but like good art does that. Like good art comes from the creator, and at the same time like becomes something more in the hands of each person that encounters it. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yeah, I agree with
100%.
that. Yeah, and I think like in particular, I've just thought so much about micro and flash fiction because I'm so into it, and I do think I think it's a benefit of writing it. I think it's a joyful thing about it that you're doing even more of that. You're just cutting more and more and more. So you're asking the reader to dream up more and more and more. And
Mm-hmm.
I just like that. I always feel like in some way I can imagine that I have like this tiny little relationship with every reader who reads a published micro or flash like that. I just say, oh, how many people, helped write this story before it ends its little life. I don't know. I like that idea.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny too, because as long-winded as I can be in my writing, where Flash is almost impossible for me to achieve, like I think of those stories, like I see the two-sentence horror stories that float around online, or I think it was
Mm,
Hemingway's like telling a story in 6 words.
the baby
Um,
shoes.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and
Never
like
worn.
Yeah.
the impact that can be achieved in such a small space, and poetry does that, I think, so well.
Oh yeah.
Between poetry and Flash, like just to do so much with so little.
Hmm. I'll have
Yeah.
to talk to a
Yeah.
poet about this too. I'm sorry, Jess. What were you
Yeah,
saying?
I was actually just gonna echo the same thing, which is that it is really interesting. I don't write a ton of poetry, but it does end up kind of being that like micro story format. So yeah, I agree. I think that that would be an interesting discussion topic for someone who writes more poetry than I do, certainly.
Yeah, we'll have to bring that up the next time we have one of our poets. Because I was thinking, I've probably said it. I may have said it here before, but I've said it a million times to other writers that I like ambiguity in work, and I sort of live in that space a lot, even with my with my longer short fiction. Um, it's okay to be ambiguous. It's always okay to be ambiguous. It's never okay to be confusing. You know, so you sort of have
Mm-hmm.
you have to make sure you don't fall over the line into confusing, so that your reader isn't sure and doesn't feel like they get pulled out of the story because they don't know what they're thinking. But ambiguity is fine. You know, people can enjoy ambiguity and
Mm-hmm.
feel tension in it, maybe, or struggle in it or whatever.
Yeah, that's such an interesting distinction to make too, because you could see that there's a really fine line between those things, and what some readers might find ambiguous, others might find confusing, depending on what it is that you're writing. But
Yeah.
that's such a good point. Yeah.
Well, that's the craft of it, right? And the
Mm-hmm.
art of it is,
Mm-hmm.
and of course, you're never going to reach every single person. You're just
Right.
going for the people it's going to speak to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Kind of spinning off from that though, Jess, did you say that this started as a poem?
It did. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm curious, do you mind talking a little bit about like how did it transform going from one thing to the next?
Sure. Yeah. So it was a short, probably like 16, 17 line poem that I wrote in a workshop for my last semester at the Stone Coast program. And I don't remember exactly what the prompt was for the poem, but when I was done writing it, I was like, I like this a lot, but I don't think I like it as a poem. I did the poetry workshop for fun. I'm not really much of a poet. Um, and really kind of thought, what else could I do with this? And as I started kind of unspooling it and kind of like lengthening it and deepening it, it just kind of like took on a totally different life. But I think almost all the original lines of the poem are in the flash piece. So that kind of ended up being the scaffolding. And then every new paragraph ended up kind of layering on top of that, and then I would like add other bits of the poem in. Like I literally had the poem open in one Word document and the story in another, and I was pulling lines from the poem into the blank document to try to like create something around it.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I've
Yeah.
that
And
never
it
just
done
be,
that before, so I was like, I don't know if this is going to work or not.
will
yeah,
work
it's just
beautifully.
it
Thanks.
did, yeah. It's always so interesting to me taking things from one form to another and like
Mhm.
what stays the same and what changes.
Yeah, it definitely tells a different story as a shorter story. Like reading the poem, you kind of get this idea of like maybe what's going on, but the short story really like deepens it. I think about, and this is just my personal view of these things, but like I think about the poem kind of as like the feeling, and the story is like the story. Because there is a story in the poem, but it's really meant to like affect that like emotional response that you get when you read poetry, which is just kind of like, ooh, whoa. And then the story is like, this is what happened. And also, some of that feeling as well. But it's definitely kind of it feels different. It's a different medium, but it definitely feels very different now that they're two separate pieces.
Well, there's a lot of overlap between like micros and prose poems. So
Mm,
oftentimes micros and prose poems will sort of appear in each other's anthologies. They will cross over the line. And the way that I often think about them when I try to have a dividing line, when they're that short, when they're like 300 words, 500 words,
mm-hmm.
is the difference between narrative and non-narrative, so there can be story in something, but does it have a thread of narrative where,
Right.
a scene is set and a thing happens? Or is it more impressionistic? And again, it's like it crosses the line. It can be sort of hybrid. But I felt that in your piece, like I could tell that was built on a poem in a way. I mean, I don't know if I would have guessed it if you had told us, but I could certainly see the scaffolding there, those a lot of those lines, like the one Josh pointed out, and there were several others that I would bet money were in that poem. So we'll have to check after.
Yeah, I don't know if I would remember every single one, but I could probably tell you. But yeah, that's really, I like that way of describing it. With the poetry being impressionistic, like I feel that way too. And I love reading poetry, but I do find it difficult to write something that doesn't have that narrative thread as concretely as regular prose, which is why that's my comfort zone. But yeah, that's a really good way of thinking about it.
At least for fiction writers, right? Because I'll never be a poet either.
No.
Yeah.
I don't think.
It's just my take on it. So
yeah.
All right. So Josh, when you're ready, I have a question for you too.
Yeah.
You're ready? Okay. So as you know, I'm not so familiar with fantasy. And I have read your whole novella. So your novella is like, I don't know, one of maybe 3 books in my life that I have read that fall into the fantasy category so far. I will get there. So I haven't thought that much about unicorns in my life. And I was just wondering if you could talk to those of us who are not so familiar with the world of fantasy, and certainly that part of the world of fantasy, what compels a person to write about a unicorn? Because that happens to be my favorite character of the novella. And I also sort of wanted to know, it will not surprise me if you say yes, if there's like lore out there, like is there like a world of kind of classic tales about unicorns that fantasy writers say, okay, whenever I write about a unicorn, it has to have sort of these qualities? Or is it just like horse, horn, done, now I create the character? Tell me.
Yeah, so I'll be honest, I don't remember what initially prompted Sasha to come into existence, other than I think it had something to do with just the idea of a battle unicorn. And I liked that it was different. And I mean, honestly, I can tell people I wrote a story about a battle unicorn and say nothing else, and they typically want to read it. So like, it's just the idea of that character was so much fun from the very beginning. In terms of like the mythos, I mean, we're all kind of familiar with the standard, like the white, slender, delicate unicorn, well, the like we see in pop culture. So like typically they're presented a certain way, and I'm not sure like geographically what the origins were. Like I think like Europe, but I'm not sure like where else in the various kind of sub areas. But the mythos has a lot to do with kind of purity and perfection. And so there are myths of like young virgins being sacrificed in the woods to unicorns. And they're always like this very kind of pure, set apart imagery. Sometimes they're protectors of the forest and of nature, and stuff like that. And this is just kind of my loose understanding. I haven't done like a deep dive research, but like that's where a lot of the kind of unicorn lore comes from. And so then if you see them in pop culture, there's a lot where like you don't attack a unicorn, it's a sin to kill a unicorn. They're very kind of it's that purity imagery. And then since then I've seen people kind of play with that, where Katie Brisky is another Stone Coast alum who wrote this unicorn story that I will never forget, where the unicorn was this like horrid goat-like thing that like preyed upon young women. And so it was kind of a feminist reclaiming of this. We're giving the women back their power rather than like being sacrificed to unicorns. That story's online. I can't remember the title, but you can find it for free online if you, I think, actually, I forget if it's online. It's amazing though. But anyway, so there have been kind of new takes on it. And so going into the novella, kind of the idea of the battle unicorn, not with any real agenda, was I wanted to kind of flip it all. And so Sasha is big and bulky rather than slender. She's black rather than white. She's all attitude. And between her and Eli, she's the one always spoiling for a fight, and Eli just wants to like get along with everybody. And so I mean, within fantasy, it's fun to kind of take the expectations and take what's familiar and turn it sideways and look at it differently. And so that was where it started. But then she just evolved as really kind of this nuanced character that like has all this attitude, but part of it is just like what she puts on to deal with people. And her and Eli's relationship kind of at the core of this story. You get more like pieces of them in some more of the quiet moments, and really kind of playing with that dynamic between the two of them became one of the really fun pieces of the novella just overall.
So that's why she's scarred too, right? Like you make a point of mentioning that she has scars. I think one of her eyes is out or something.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
That's part of playing with the non-purity thing.
Yeah, and part of the story is that they both carry scars, physical and unseen. They're both ex-soldiers who feel like they don't have a home anymore. And so like they found kind of this comfort in trusting each other when they don't really trust much anything else. And so yeah, that's definitely a part of more physically of her character, but it comes into play for both of them.
Okay. Do they typically have magical powers, or did you just create that for Sasha?
There's typically something magical about them. The whole kind of magical field and sort of telekinesis that she has is my invention, to the best of my knowledge.
She has telekinesis? I don't remember that.
Well, that's what I'm calling it. She has the ability to push things with force out from herself, and so she can move things with that, but it's more just a force coming from her.
Yeah.
I just want to say that when I was a kid, my favorite movie was The Last Unicorn. I watched it so many times. I mean, that's like the opposite of what you're talking about, because it's like the trope on trope on trope of unicorns, but I just want to say that I loved it. And I read a lot of unicorn books, and I wish there was more like adult fantasy that had unicorns in it. Like age it up, get rid of some tropes. I hope you start a trend with this one.
That'd be fun to bring unicorns back as the next fantasy thing.
Yeah, I mean, screw vampires.
Yeah,
they're done. They're over.
I love dragons, and so those can stay, but like bring some unicorns into it.
Yeah, I don't know why it ended up being kind of like a girly, childish thing for some reason, but like they're very, I don't know. I think it's like majestic and cool, and I wish there was more of it.
That works with the purity notion, right? Like little girls.
Yeah, I think that's probably what happened. And all like the little horse toys when you're a kid, you can get. Yeah, I definitely had unicorn toys when I was a kid.
Did you?
Oh yeah.
This was not a thing when I was a child. I don't know. Maybe I was sheltered. I don't know.
Not enough unicorn toys.
Where did you grow
There's still
up,
time.
Jess?
Where did I Harpswell here in Maine.
Oh wow. Okay. Because I'm wondering if there's any regional difference. Probably not. It's probably just an age thing, right? Like it probably just wasn't a thing when I was a kid.
Yeah, I don't know. I do know that Last Unicorn movie was very popular. I think it was either late 70s or 80s. I can't remember exactly. But
late 70s? Are you kidding me?
Yeah, maybe 80s somewhere.
Yeah, I was going to say 80s, but I'm not 100% certain.
Yeah. I may have just blanked it all out then, because I'm not that old. I should remember anything from the 80s.
Yeah, you should go find that movie and watch it, and you'll feel very, very nostalgic about it. And even having not seen it, it'll remind you of the 80s.
Yeah, I have to confess, I haven't actually read the book either, and I keep meaning to do that because I hear wonderful things about it.
Yeah, I also haven't read it. I do have it though, so it's definitely been on my list for a while.
And you said there were a whole bunch of unicorn books?
Yeah, there was there's but mostly in like the YA, not even YA, I would say like middle grade fantasy has a lot of unicorn stuff. At least when I was younger I would say like early 90s, there was early 90s, mid 90s, there was a bunch that were published around then, I think. And there was a series of unicorn books that I remember reading. I don't remember what they're called, but
okay, I definitely would have missed that if it was in the 90s. But I'm upset that I don't know about this movie.
It was a magical time. I think it's on Netflix, or it's on some streaming service, I'm pretty sure. So it shouldn't be hard to find. Definitely worth it.
All right. Well, Josh, It seems like it's your job to bring back the unicorn. That's what I think we're saying here.
Please.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I know like The Last Unicorn is one of those kind of foundational works in fantasy. Like so many fantasy authors I know reference it and like grew up with that movie and the book. But yeah, that's really that's the big one. So
I think we've done good work here.
yeah, we'll see if Sasha the Battle Unicorn joins that canon.
I certainly hope so.
When are you gonna release the illustrations? What was that little tease you put out there?
Oh yeah, so I'm waiting till I have the final the final version of the last illustration for the interior of the book, and then I just have them in hard copy right now. So once I have all of the finished ones, I'm scanning them digitally to get ready for publication. And so that's when I will have them available to share more. But now that we're mentioning it, we have a couple minutes before wrapping up. So let me step away. I will debut one illustration here tonight. So whoever's tuned in, this is your chance to see what very few people have seen.
Yay! That was exciting.
Oh my gosh,
See,
I'm so excited.
If you insist on what you want, you get it.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, hey, we really need to see these.
The people have demanded it.
Yeah, this is I love the idea of getting something illustrated by an illustrator. I find that that's like a lot of people have been doing that recently, and I had never really thought to have that done. It's just like such a good idea to bring something to life like that.
It is a great idea. Oh boy. Okay.
So this illustrator actually goes perfectly. It's set right after the scene I read. So we'll see how this works on my webcam. But
oh wow.
Can you pull it back just a tiny bit? Oh, that is so good.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, I love it.
I love the style. That's so cool.
Yeah, it reminds me of like some classic books, older books, almost like some Huck Finn.
Yeah. Ink drawings.
Yeah.
That's somewhat what I was going for, because like it's got the chapter titles, it's got the black and white interior illustrations, which I always love seeing, like when I pick up a book and it has those things. And you don't run into them too often nowadays. So
no, that's going to be beautiful. Wow.
Yeah, no, it has been the coolest thing to like write these characters and then hand off the excerpts and get back these images that are the people brought to life.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And would you like to tell the world who drew that, or is that something that you're keeping to yourself?
Yeah, no, I can do that. So this is actually my grandmother, Darby Mumford, is a trained illustrator. And so when I was working on the novella, I approached her and was like, hey, do you want to do some illustrations? And she had the time. So we've been collaborating for maybe it's been like the past year now, because I mean 2020 has been a thing. And so we've been working on roughing them out and then turning them into final. So yeah, one more to come, and then I'll be formatting. I'm self-publishing this novella, so it will be out when I get my act together. But we'll do that, put some finishing touches on it, and I will be announcing more details as soon as I have them. So stay tuned.
Oh, that's so exciting. That's amazing. Really.
Yeah, that's great. I love it. Thanks to your grandma.
Yeah, no, she does incredible work. So
we'll have to have a party or something. I hope, well, as soon as the pandemic is done, we'll have some kind of party. Yeah, and feed your grandma.
Maybe a book launch.
Yeah. Once it's ready, we'll have to see where everything stands in the world and figure out what book launches will look like.
Yeah, no kidding, right?
Yeah.
Whether there will be food or will be faces on the screen, but there will be celebration.
Eventually we'll do something in person. Yeah. Great.
So any final thoughts before we wrap up for tonight, or?
No, I'm just looking forward to the reading tomorrow. Do you want to preview that for us, Josh?
Yeah. So we have 3 more readers tomorrow. We have Allison Hartman Adams, who has read for us before, reading more fantasy actually. And so that should be fun. We have Shannon Bowring, who is a new attendee to the series, and we're excited to have her, also a Stone Coast student. And Allison is as well. It's been a Stone Coast weekend, and how it ended up playing out. And we have Julia Spencer Fleming, the main crime writer, will be rounding out our lineup tomorrow. And so we're really looking forward to having her join us as well. So 3 o'clock tomorrow afternoon, or on demand whenever you tune into these. They will be available for as long as the internet. So yeah, thank you for everyone who tuned in tonight, for joining us for this reading, and hopefully you'll come back tomorrow and tell your friends, because we love telling stories and we love having people listen to them. And one more shout out to Quiet City Books and the Lewiston Public Library. And thank you, Jess, for joining us again. Always
Thanks
a
for
delight to
having
have
me.
you.
Yes, thank you, Jess.
Yeah, so everyone have a good evening, and we'll see you next time.